Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you the first part of the new series What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 1, Traveling Through the Soul Society. I just want to lie down and complete tasks from 9 to 5. Soul Society, Siriitii, 1st Division Barracks. Amidst the sounds of enthusiastic training from the soldiers, Uehara Shiroa stretched lazily and slowly got up. After casually donning his Shinigami uniform, he habitually opened the task panel to check his daily assignments. As expected, today's task had been refreshed. Visiting old friends, daily task. Today's wind is particularly strong, a perfect day for drinking. You decide to invite a friend for a drink and a chat. Reward, random attribute +2. A simple panel, simple tasks, and good rewards. It was exactly what he expected from his system, laid back, stress-free, and perfect for a salted fish like him. In his previous life, Uehara Shiroa had been an ordinary office worker. More than 20 years ago, he inexplicably found himself reincarnated into the world of Bleach, becoming just another Rakangai orphan. Having read the manga, he was well aware of how Soul Society operated. This place was home to countless spirits. Those without spiritual pressure were merely wandering souls, constantly at risk of being erased from existence. Those with spiritual pressure could become Shinigami, and those with exceptionally strong spiritual pressure could live for thousands of years, securing their place in Soul Society's ruling class. However, even achieving Bankai did not guarantee safety. After all, history proved that Siriitii was far from secure. Following Aizen's rebellion, the Quincy King Yawatch arrived, causing even greater devastation. One by one, powerful Shinigami fell. Even the strongest of them all, Captain Commander Yamamoto, was slain. If not for Kurosaki Ichigo's miraculous intervention, Soul Society would have been annihilated. In a world filled with such catastrophic threats, having the power to protect oneself was essential. Fortunately, Uehara Shiroa possessed an innate talent for spiritual pressure, allowing him to become a Shinigami. His talent, while not monstrous, was still quite decent. More importantly, as a transmigrator, he had a golden finger. Upon his arrival in this world, he awakened a task system, a simple panel devoid of intelligence. The system provided only two types of tasks. The first was a daily task, like visiting old friends. Completing these tasks granted random attribute increases, such as enhanced Ryatsu or skill proficiency. The second type was special tasks, which were triggered randomly. These tasks provided even greater rewards, sometimes granting abilities or equipment from other anime and movies. For example, when he had first arrived in Rakangai, he had triggered the special task, exploring Rakangai. Completing it had granted him the shadow clone technique from Naruto, a skill so overpowered it was practically a cheat code. With the system's assistance, Uehara Shiroa confidently joined the Shino Academy and became a reserve Shinigami. From then on, he leisurely completed daily tasks and occasionally sent out shadow clones to train in his stead. Before he knew it, more than 20 years had passed, and both his strength and status had undergone a complete transformation. On the surface, his talents seemed slightly inferior to prodigies like Ikimara Jin, Shibukayan, and Kuchiki Byakuya. But in truth, what people saw was only the tip of the iceberg. With a thought, Uehara Shiroa pulled up his character panel. Name, Uehara Shiroa. Position, 1st Division, 7th seat. Ryatsu, 3rd class, Captain level. Zampakuto, Shunkyo, Fleeting Void, 2nd stage Shirkai, change Zampakuto name from Danko to Shunkyo, because Danko already existed. Zanjutsu, Vice Captain level. Hakuda, Senior Officer level. Kido, Captain level. Shuunpa, Vice Captain level. Abilities. Shadow Clone Technique, B rank, Mastered. Stand, White Album, S rank, Mastered. Breathing Technique, Sun Breathing, B rank, Proficient. Items. Disguise Glasses, B rank, Kryptonian Creation. 5 Thunder Curse, C rank, Talisman for Cultivation. Death Gloves, D rank, Extraordinary Artifact. After joining the academy, he had completed a special task and received the S rank ability, Stand, White Album. This stand, originally belonging to Gyacho from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5, allowed him to generate ultra-low temperatures, freeze the air to create armor, and even lower temperatures to absolute zero. 3 years after receiving his Asachi, he successfully awakened his Zampakuto, Shunkyo. Shunkyo's ability was reminiscent of Obito's Kamui, a complete fusion of the left and right eye techniques. However, due to the presence of countless old monsters in Soul Society, Uehara Shiroa disguised its true nature. He publicly claimed that his Zampakuto was named White Season, with an ice-based ability that could freeze everything around him. His exceptional performance at the academy earned him the title of Genius, and he graduated as the top student, securing a position in the First Division. As the Captain Commander's direct unit, the First Division had the highest status, the best resources, and the fiercest competition. To prove their strength, several officers had challenged him to duels upon his arrival. Uehara Shiroa, who preferred a relaxed life, had merely fought half-heartedly. Yet, before he even used his full strength, his opponents had already collapsed. Thus, he inexplicably became the 7th seat of the First Division, a small but respectable leadership position within the Gotei 13. After all, each division housed hundreds of Shinigami, and to become an officer, especially in the First Division, was a significant achievement. Still, Uehara Shiroa had no interest in climbing further up the ranks. In his previous life, he had suffered enough under the work culture. In this life, he just wanted to take things easy, complete his daily tasks, and live a peaceful existence. Overtime? Not in this lifetime. Why bother when he could be drinking with Kayaraka Shunsui and casually finishing his daily missions? With that thought, Uehara Shiroa staggered out of the barracks. His leisurely demeanor stood in stark contrast to the officers training diligently around him. Seeing him, several officers could only shake their heads helplessly. Uehara Shiroa had long proven himself a genius. And geniuses always had privileges. Ordinary soldiers looked at him with a mix of admiration, awe, and envy. Becoming an officer of the First Division before turning 40? Befriending captains like Kayaraka Shunsui? Rising from Rukongai to surpass noble-born Shinigami? It was the kind of success story they could only dream of. But while they saw a carefree young man, they remained unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. Within that personal space exclusive to Shunkyo, for shadow clones were relentlessly training in Zanjutsu, Hakuda, and Kido. As a transmigrator, Uehara Shiroa understood just how overpowered the shadow clone technique was. Despite being labeled a mere B-rank ability, its training potential was on par with S-rank skills. It was Naruto Uzumaki's personal cheat code, one of the greatest hacks in existence when it came to skill development. Once a shadow clone was dispelled, its knowledge and experience were instantly transferred to the original body. By creating 4 clones at once, Uehara Shiroa essentially had 4 extra bodies constantly training in his place. This alone was enough to master the fundamental 4 techniques of a Shinigami. While others took centuries or even millennia to hone their skills, he had achieved in 20 years what most Shinigami couldn't accomplish in a lifetime. The secret behind his strength? Shadow clones. Grinding. And an unshakable determination to slack off. Chapter 2, Angry Lisa, the Girl with Glasses. Inside his personal training space, Uehara Shiroa could sense his shadow clones diligently honing their skills. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips as he felt more at ease. Stepping outside, he took a few casual Shuunpa strides and arrived at the 8th Division's barracks in no time. The 1st Division bore the responsibility of leading the 13 court guard squads, conveying the resolutions of the Central 46, and overseeing official meetings. Meanwhile, the 8th Division specialized in intelligence gathering, monitoring the Rukongai districts, compiling reports on Siriitei's various squads, and essentially serving as the eyes and ears of the 1st Division. Due to their closely linked roles, a dedicated liaison officer was required to facilitate communication between the 2 divisions. That person happened to be Uehara Shiroa. Through this position, he had naturally become well acquainted with Kayaraka Shunsui, the 8th Division's captain. Over time, they discovered that their personalities, temperaments, and interests aligned perfectly. One enjoyed slacking off and drinking sake. The other also enjoyed slacking off and drinking sake. Thus, their friendship was inevitable. Frequent visits led to familiarity, and before long, Uehara Shiroa and Kayaraka Shunsui became drinking buddies. Of course, unlike the perverted old man, Uehara Shiroa had no ulterior motives. He was merely studying the cultural customs of Seoul society while efficiently completing his daily tasks. On the way to the 8th Division, Uehara Shiroa encountered no obstacles. With practiced ease, he reached the captain's office and entered. Upon seeing him, Kayaraka Shunsui pretended to be hard at work but quickly abandoned the act as he greeted him enthusiastically. "Shiroha, you're here? What's that? A drink? No, no. Lisa will kill me. Wait, why did you already open the sake? That's top-grade liquor. I got this bottle after serious effort from an old hermit in the mountains. All right, just one glass. No more than that." Half a day later, Lisa Yadamaru, who had just returned from her duties, noticed something odd. The division members' gazes felt off. Her heart sank. Could it be that guy again? Without hesitation, Lisa flashed into the captain's office, her mind already prepared for the worst. Then, she saw it. Kayaraka Shunsui was swaying drunkenly, singing an indecent tune. And there, sitting comfortably, was Uehara Shiroa, completely relaxed and smirking. They had done it again. Lisa clenched her fists hard. Her patience snapped. A large part of the reason she had been drowning in work was because of these two. Her voice boomed through the office. "Captain, take your job seriously. And stop drinking during working hours." Uehara Shiroa, with practiced ease, immediately shifted the blame. "This has nothing to do with me. I just opened the bottle." Kayaraka Shunsui gave a sheepish smile and tried to pacify her. "Ah ha ha. Lisa-chan, don't be so harsh. It was just a moment of happiness. I'll punish myself with 3 drinks, and I promise this won't happen again." Ha! Lisa's glasses-wearing, seemingly quiet demeanor shattered in an instant. A terrifying aura of doom radiated from her petite frame as she slowly drew her Zampakuto, Haguro Tanbo. "You two, enough." Realizing that violence was about to commence, Uehara Shiroha made a swift exit, disappearing with a shunpa. As for Kayaraka Shunsui, he was on his own. The sounds of pleas for mercy echoed behind him, but Uehara Shiroha remained steadfast in his decision. Better his survival than both of them suffering. The wine was finished, the salted fish lifestyle preserved, and the mission successfully completed. Perfect. System notification. Congratulations! You have completed today's daily task. Reward, +1 Ryatsu, +1 sun breathing proficiency. Uehara Shiroa felt a subtle shift in his Ryatsu. A slight boost, but in Seoul society, Ryatsu is everything. Battles between Shinigami were battles of spiritual pressure. The strong overwhelmed the weak. Sometimes, a mere glance was enough to erase someone from existence. Aizen's sheer presence alone had rendered Renji, Hitsugaya, and Kamamura completely powerless back then. In this world, absolute Ryatsu meant absolute authority. Moreover, the stronger one's Ryatsu, the longer their lifespan. More time meant more missions meant greater Ryatsu, and greater Ryatsu meant even more time. A perfect cycle of power. Even if his innate spiritual pressure wasn't as monstrous as Aizen's, Uehara Shiroha knew he could still grow infinitely stronger through daily tasks. This was the exact realm that Aizen had once dreamed of reaching. Additionally, his sun-breathing proficiency had increased. With a single daily task, he had gained deeper insight into its 12 forms. His strength had improved yet again. This was the true power of his system. As long as he stayed alive long enough and continued his daily grinding, he would eventually reach the peak of Seoul society. In Bleach, Ryatsu classifications were as follows. 20th class, ordinary squad members. 10th class and above, eligible for seated officer positions. 8th class and above, minimum requirement for Shirkai. 5th and 4th class, vice captain level. 3rd class, captain level. Most importantly, a Shinigami with 3rd class Ryatsu could live for 1,000 years. With only daily tasks, Uehara Shiroa could max out every ability effortlessly. 1 million daily quests? Who could possibly compete with that? Meanwhile, back at the 8th division, Kayaraka Shunsui had sobbed himself sober. Lisa, his ferocious vice-captain, had refined her physical sobering technique to perfection. Watching Uehara Shiroa's hasty retreat, Lisa muttered, her tone filled with irritation. TCH. He ran fast. He got off easy. Kayarako sighed dramatically. You two sure get along well. Lisa shot him a glare. We are just ordinary book friends. Don't misunderstand. It was true. Lisa often visited bookstores to buy and read literature. She was a serious and proper bookworm. At least, for now, she hadn't fallen into the world of more peculiar literature. Since Shiroa frequented the same bookstores, they had simply grown familiar with each other. Kayaraku smirked knowingly. Oh? Just book friends, huh? Lisa adjusted her glasses, looking unbothered. Then, without another word, she flicked her pigtail and left. Chapter 3 Special Mission 7. Standing in front of the 8th Division barracks, Uehara Shiroa let out a leisurely yawn. Although it was still early, he had already begun contemplating where to start his exciting nightlife. However, before he could make a decision, he noticed a familiar sight: a soldier from the 8th Division hurriedly reporting something to a female Shinigami he knew quite well. The slender girl with glasses, a book tucked under her arm, was none other than Ayase Nanao, the 10th seat of the 8th Division. She was Kayaraka Shuinsue's niece and, over time, had become a good friend of Uehara Shiroa. Like Lisa Yadamaru, they had met through their shared love of reading. The soldier quickly finished his report and left, leaving Nanao alone. Curious about her serious expression, Uehara Shiroa stepped forward to greet her. Yo, Nanao-chan. What's with that look? Something happened? Hearing his voice, Ayase Nanao turned to him, her brows slightly furrowed. Uehara Shiroa, something serious happened in Rukongai. Her voice was calm but carried a weight of concern. The 12th Division has just detected an abnormality. A large number of civilians in Rukongai have gone missing over the past month. The 12th Division has already reported this information to the Captain Commander. Just now, an advance investigation team of 10 Shinigami was dispatched to look into it. Now, all divisions have been notified. Her tone was professional, but the situation was anything but ordinary. Even though the civilians of Rukongai were often seen as disposable in the grand scheme of things, mass disappearances still raised alarms. This was because the balance of the spiritual world had to be maintained. The number and strength of souls in Soul Society, the human world, Hueco Mundo, and even Hell had to remain in equilibrium. If one realm became overpopulated or depleted, it could cause a catastrophic collapse of the entire spiritual cycle. This was why the Captain Commander had immediately sent an investigation squad. Upon hearing Ayase Nanao's report, Uehara Shiroa's mind clicked. It's happening. Coincidentally, at that very moment, his system sent a new prompt. System notification. Special Mission 7, witness the birth of the Visored. On a full moon night, something sinister is unfolding in the depths of Rukongai. A secret experiment is taking place. You decide to investigate and witness the birth of the massed army with your own eyes. Reward: random ability or item. Special missions were what truly accelerated his growth. Daily missions were steady, long-term investments. Special missions, on the other hand, were the jackpot, the kind of rewards that could make him absurdly powerful overnight. If luck was on his side, he could even obtain EX-ranked abilities and become unstoppable. However, special missions weren't guaranteed, they had to be triggered. Based on Uehara Shiroa's own observations, the highest chance of triggering a special mission was when he was involved in key events of the plot. That's why. Until he became truly invincible, he had no plans to drastically alter the original storyline. Smiling lightly, he patted Ise Nanao's shoulder in a reassuring manner. Don't worry, Nanao-chan. With the wise leadership of the Captain Commander and the Central 46, Seoul society will continue to be prosperous, peaceful, and harmonious. Ise Nanao narrowed her eyes at him. There was something off about the way he said that. The words themselves were perfectly fine, official, even, but coming from Uehara Shiroa's mouth. They somehow sounded sarcastic. But why? She couldn't quite put her finger on it. Before she could question him further, Uehara Shiroa simply waved and walked away. After a leisurely stroll, humming a tune, Uehara Shiroa returned to his residence. As a seated officer of the 1st Division, his living conditions were exceptional. His house even had a private courtyard, not as extravagant as those belonging to captains, but spacious enough for training. Not that he trained outside. No. All of his training took place indoors. And for good reason. His entire house was layered with powerful keto barriers, not just one, but multiple layers. Though these barriers weren't as powerful as the Soul King's soul-blocking membrane, they were still more than enough to block all forms of surveillance. After all, the Technology Development Bureau was still in its infancy. And Aizen's grand scientific project had only just reached a critical turning point. At this stage, there weren't as many black tech surveillance tools in use. Still, Uehara Shiroa preferred to be cautious. He wasn't just guarding against Aizen's ambition. He was also wary of the Invisible Empire. Yawacha's method of stealing Bankai was something worth preparing for. During the Thousand-Year Blood War, Yamamoto Genryusai had unleashed the strongest Bankai in history, Zenka no Tak. Yet, in the very next moment, Yawach stole it. In the blink of an eye, the strongest Captain Commander in history was reduced to ashes. A tragic and absurd end. Uehara Shiroa wasn't going to let that happen to himself. Upon reaching his bedroom, Uehara Shiroa channeled his Ryatsu. Immediately, his Zampakuto, Shunkyo, emitted a faint white glow. In an instant, his entire room became shrouded in an invisible force, sealing it from outside interference. Now, it was completely secure. Seating himself cross-legged, he placed Shunkyo across his lap and began his daily blade meditation practice. In Soul Society, a Shinigami's Zampakuto was their core, comparable to an immortal cultivator's life-bound treasure. A powerful Zampakuto could define a Shinigami's entire combat style. Take Aizen, for example. Without Kyokusuajetsu, he would have never been able to toy with Soul Society the way he did. Of course, his absurd Ryatsu and intellect played a role, too. After all, even when Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada recreated Kyokusuajetsu using the Yamato mirror, it wasn't nearly as powerful. The true strength of a Zampakuto wasn't just in its abilities. It was also tied to the user's mastery, will, and soul resonance. That's why mastering blade meditation was essential. It had been a respected technique in Soul Society for thousands of years. Reaching a high level of blade meditation allowed a Shinigami to directly communicate with their Zampakuto, greatly enhancing their control over Shirkai and Bankai. And thanks to his shadow clones, Uehara Shiroa was making absurd progress. As he closed his eyes and synchronized with Shunkyo, the Zampakuto's cold white glow intensified. Their connection deepened. Satisfied, Uehara Shiroa studied his blade. Shunkyo resembled an ancient long sword, exuding a majestic, restrained aura. Compared to other Zampakuto with exotic transformations, Shunkyo's form was simple yet powerful. But its ability was absolutely broken. Chapter 4, Perfect Zampakuto. Shunkyo, Uehara Shiroa's Zampakuto, was a system reward and ability perfectly suited for him with limitless potential. Its Shirkai had 2 stages, with the first stage being permanent, meaning his Zampakuto was always in its released state. This granted him a truly broken ability. He could enter an intangible state at any time, making him immune to all physical and spiritual attacks. However, like Kamui, he was unable to attack while intangible. Even so, the energy consumption for maintaining this state was minimal. With his Ryatsu, Uehara Shiroa could theoretically remain intangible for days without issue. Uchiha Obito had dominated the ninja world with a 5-minute intangibility limit. Uehara Shiroa had no cooldown. The horror of Shunkyo could be easily imagined. And that was just the first stage of Shurkai. The second stage, which required manual activation, was even more terrifying. By overlapping Shunkyo's space with a portion of reality, he could slice through space itself, allowing him to attack in ways that were completely unavoidable. This made his second stage Shurkai a fusion of Op no Mi's room, One Piece, and absolute domain where he dictated the rules. Kakashi's Kamui, Naruto, instant, precise spatial destruction. In this state, even Hiero, Arrancar's steel skin. Spiritual pressure-based defense. High-level Kido barriers were utterly useless. Against his second stage Shurkai, there was no protection. For offense, it was absolute destruction. For defense, it was absolute invulnerability. That was Shunkyo. And this was only Shurkai. Bankai? It would be on an entirely different level. However, Uehara Shiroa's Bankai training had just begun. Even with his third-class captain-level Ryatsu, he still lacked the necessary strength to fully master Bankai. But he wasn't worried. With his task system, achieving Bankai was just a matter of time. As the night deepened, Uehara Shiroa prepared to receive the results from his Shadow Clones training. In his mind, he could clearly perceive Shunkyo's exclusive dimension, a vast personal space. It was as large as an entire city. For comparison, Obito's Kamui dimension was tiny in comparison. With such a massive training ground, his 4 Shadow Clones could train freely, even performing high-level techniques without spatial limitations. With a thought, one of his Shadow Clones dispersed, the one that had been training in Zanjutsu. Immediately, a flood of experience and memories surged into Uehara Shiroa's mind. He carefully processed and absorbed them. He could feel his swordsmanship improving. It was a sensation similar to receiving the system reward, Zanjutsu +1. Satisfied, he proceeded to dispel the remaining clones, those training in Kido, Shuinpa, and Hakuda. With each clone's dispelling, his combat proficiency silently increased. Stronger without even lifting a finger. If other Shinigami knew about this, even captains would die of envy. When the next morning arrived, Uehara Shiroa checked his daily task panel. System notification. Daily task: take a walk. Take a peaceful evening stroll. When you reach 99 years old, you will embrace the lifestyle of a wandering vagabond. Reward: random attribute +2. Reading the task description, Uehara Shiroa couldn't help but internally complain. In Soul Society, living to 99 isn't called longevity, it's called premature death. As always, daily tasks were easy, there were no penalties for failure, and they constantly provided steady growth. It was free power-ups every day. With a light stretch, he left his courtyard, ready to complete his daily mission. But before heading out, he made a quick stop. He went to visit the 1st Division's vice-captain, Sasakabe Chojiro. This white-haired, golden-eyed old man was not to be underestimated. 1,000 years ago, during Yhwach's invasion of Soul Society, Sasakabe Chojiro had been the one to stab Yhwach in the back, allowing Captain Commander Yamamoto to land the finishing blow. Together, they saved Soul Society from total annihilation. Despite his strength and experience, Chojiro chose to remain as vice-captain, dedicating himself to serving under Yamamoto. Even though he had the qualifications to be a captain, his loyalty never wavered. Uehara Shiroa casually reported some of the recent intelligence he had gathered. Much of it was outdated or minor details, but effort mattered more than accuracy. After all, slacking off still required proper tactics. One could be lazy with subordinates, but in front of superiors, the best strategy was to appear hardworking. A good employee wasn't the one who worked the hardest, but the one who was always visible to the boss. As expected, Chojiro nodded approvingly, looking at Uehara Shiroa with relief. This young man is diligent after all, the vice-captain thought.
Some people in Suriitai gossiped about Uehara Shiroa, calling him a lazy troublemaker.
But wasn't he right here, working hard? As for his frequent visits to the red light district for drinks, meh. At least he wasn't as hopeless as Kayaraka Shunsui. Meanwhile, at the 8th Division. Far away, Kayaraka Shunsui suddenly shivered. He frowned, rubbing his arms. Did the drinking incident get exposed? No, that's impossible. The old man has known about it for years. Maybe, some girls are thinking about me? He sighed dramatically. Being too charming is such a curse. The Suriitai, located at the center of Soul Society, was massive. It spanned 130,000 soul miles, with a radius of 365 soul miles. For comparison, Karakura town, home to 100,000 people, had a radius of only 1 soul mile. It would take an ordinary soul about 40 days just to walk around the outskirts of Suriitai. Arranged in a circular design, the city's outer walls were composed of sekiseki, which repelled spiritual energy. This barrier shielded Suriitai from outside intrusions, ensuring that only authorized individuals could enter. At each of the 4 main gates, north, south, east, and west, a powerful guardian stood watch, allowing only permitted personnel to pass. At that moment, Uehara Shiroa was wandering near the White Road Gate, enjoying the scenic view. The architecture was traditional, gray and white buildings, tiled rooftops, exuding a classic Japanese aesthetic. The air was fresh, and the closer he got to the center, the denser the spiritual particles became. Before he realized it, his daily task was already completed. System notification. Task complete. Reward, Zanjutsu +1, Ryatsu +1. Another effortless power-up. Life was good. Now, only one special mission remained on his panel. Witness the birth of the masked army. And the reason he had come to White Road Gate was to complete it. Chapter 5, Aizen is an honest man. Jin Ikamaru, you can't bully honest people. As Uehara Shiroa stepped outside the White Road Gate, he immediately noticed a group of Shinigami moving in the same direction, toward Rukongai. Each of them had imposing physiques, some sporting khaki, streetwise hairstyles, giving them the look of either seasoned fighters or biker gang members. On the back of their Shihakusho, 4 bold characters stood out. 9th Division Combat Unit. At the front of the group stood none other than Muguruma Kensei, the captain of the 9th Division. Aside from Kensei, Uehara Shiroa also recognized 2 other familiar faces. One was Kuna Mashiro, the green-haired, carefree vice-captain, known for her overwhelming Hakuta skills and seemingly boundless energy. The other figure lurked in the shadows, as if he had faded from existence itself, Tozen Kaname, the 5th seat of the 9th Division. At this time, Tozen looked very different from his later years. Instead of his signature sunglasses and dreadlocks, he sported an afro, similar to the 7th Division captain, Lovekawa. Most of his face was obscured by a white mask, revealing only his closed eyes. Of course, this wasn't a hollow mask, just an ordinary one. Uehara Shiroa glanced at them briefly before continuing on his way, acting as if he hadn't noticed anything. He knew exactly why Muguruma Kensei was headed to Rukongai. The disappearances of Rukongai civilians had finally drawn the attention of the higher-ups. And this was the beginning of the holification incident. Silently, Aizen had already set his plans into motion, spinning a web of deception over Soul Society. The captains of the Gotii 13 had no idea what was coming. But this time, Uehara Shiroa intended to give Aizen a little surprise, while reaping the benefits for himself. As Uehara Shiroa leisurely strolled through the streets near the White Road Gate, he suddenly felt a presence. His gaze shifted toward the shadows. As if in response, a silver-haired figure stepped forward. The boy wore a Shinigami uniform, with a 5th Division armband on his right arm. With a sly smile, he greeted him. Uehara-kun, long time no see. Though his tone was light-hearted, there was something about him, something unnervingly cold, like the venomous stare of a snake. Uehara Shiroa let out a sigh, smirking. Jin Ikamaru. After all these years, you still haven't changed. Still walking around with your eyes closed all the time. That must be a genius thing, huh?
The smirk on Ikemaru Jin's fox-like face grew wider. Uehara-kun, you're still as amusing as ever.
Though their time as classmates had been brief only about a year, Jin had always been somewhat intrigued by Uehara Shiroha.
The reason?
Unlike the other Shinigami in training, who worked tirelessly to improve their skills, Uehara Shiroha had always done things differently. One day, he'd skip training to go fishing. The next day, he'd wander off to the market. On other days, he'd sneak out for drinks. To outsiders, he seemed lazy, unmotivated, and wasting his potential. But Jin wasn't convinced. There was something strange about Uehara Shiroha. A kind of undeniable confidence, as if he already knew everything would work out for him. It was vague, but it was enough for Jin to pay attention. Testing the waters, Jin continued. I heard that Vice Captain Aizen thinks very highly of you.
Promoted you to a seated officer, didn't he? Uehara Shiroha let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Well, Jin-san. Vice Captain Aizen is one of the few honest men in Seoul society. You should work hard and never disappoint an honest man's expectations.
There was something off about how he said that.
Something subtly mocking, yet perfectly polite.
Jin's expression didn't change, but his mind sharpened.
Uehara Shiroha wasn't supposed to know anything. So why did it feel like he did?
After a moment of silence, Jin simply nodded and smiled, showing gratitude toward Aizen as expected. But inside, his thoughts were churning.
Was Uehara Shiroha really as simple as he seemed?
Not wanting to overextend his probing, Jin simply waved and took his leave.
For now. Meanwhile, in Rokangai, Mugirumo Kensei and his squad 9 Shinigami stood in stunned silence.
They had just saved a young boy, Hisagi Shuei, from a hollow attack.
But something wasn't right.
There had been no signs of a Cumin, black cavity, opening nearby.
Where had this hollow come from? Then they found it. 10 fallen Shinigami. All completely intact, yet completely empty.
Their bodies were fully preserved, but they were nothing more than shells. Their uniforms were still fastened, as if they had simply disappeared inside them. Their straw sandals still contained traces of their feet, as if their limbs had suddenly vanished. It was exactly the same as the disappearing civilians before. When souls perished in Seoul society, their bodies typically disintegrated into ryatsu. Yet these corpses remained intact.
It wasn't death.
It was erasure. And the disappearances had spread to the advance team itself.
A cold chill crept down Kensei's spine. Without hesitation, he barked out urgent orders. Tozen.
Report to the Central 46 immediately, tell them all 10 advance team Shinigami are missing under the same circumstances as the civilians.
To do.
Get in touch with Squad 12, have them send in their technicians immediately to seal off the scene and investigate.
Mashiro. Get everyone ready. We're staying here tonight.
As Kensei finished giving orders, his eyes hardened.
Whoever was behind this,
they wouldn't get past the 9th Division. The Squad 9 members nodded in determination. Even Mashiro Kuna, despite her usual carefree nature, was fully prepared for battle. Shortly after, To-Do returned with news. The vice captain of the 12th Division, Saragaki Hiyori, was already on her way.
As for Captain Urahara Kisuke,
he was currently occupied with his own secret research and unable to respond. Hearing this, Kensei finally felt a little relief.
As night fell, Kensei patrolled the perimeter once more. Returning to his tent, he noticed Mashiro Kuna already fast asleep.
Shaking his head, he sighed. Only someone as carefree as her could sleep so soundly right now.
And then,
a piercing scream shattered the silence outside.
Chapter 6, Everyone is showing off, only the boxers are getting beaten. In Rokangai, Kensei Mugirumo heard the blood-curdling screams and rushed out of the tent, gripping his Zampakuto tightly.
The sight that greeted him was a massacre. 2 members of the 9th Division who had been on night watch lay motionless on the ground, their lifeblood seeping into the dirt, staining it crimson. Their lifeless eyes reflected the pale glow of the full moon above, a stark contrast to the burning rage in Kensei's heart. A short distance away, squad member Tadu stood frozen, his Zampakuto still in his hand, yet there was no sign of movement.
Tadu. Kensei's eyes turned bloodshot, and he instinctively activated his Shurikai. Tachike's, blow them away.
The blade in his hand transformed, and Kensei took a step forward, ready to strike down the traitor before him. But then, he hesitated. Tadu, who had been standing still just a moment ago, suddenly had blood gushing from his throat.
He collapsed to the ground in an eerie silence. Something was wrong. Kensei's instincts screamed at him. Tadu's Zampakuto was clean.
There was no trace of blood on the blade. If he had been the attacker, the weapon would have been stained.
And the scream. Kensei suddenly realized it hadn't come from the squad members on the ground.
It had come from Tadu.
His unease deepened.
The shadows around him felt heavier.
This was no simple ambush. This was a carefully orchestrated trap.
A trap set not just for his squad but for him, the captain of the 9th Division.
Mashiro! Wake up! Kensei's thoughts turned to Mashiro Kuna, who was still sleeping inside the tent.
Panic surged through him.
He needed to wake Mashiro and get him out of here.
He stepped back, turning toward the tent.
Darkness. For a brief moment, his vision blurred.
His body wavered. By the time his senses returned, a sharp, searing pain exploded in his chest.
Kensei looked down.
A narrow, deadly blade had pierced through his body from behind, its tip glistening with his blood.
His grip on his Zampakuto trembled.
He slowly turned his head, and his pupils shrank in sheer disbelief.
You?
Why? His voice was weak, filled with shock and betrayal. The full moon continued to bathe the land in its cold light, silently witnessing the tragedy unfold. Meanwhile, in the barracks of the 1st Division, Uehara Shiroha sat leisurely, absent-mindedly spinning a pair of thin-framed glasses between his fingers. His lips curled into a faint smile as he checked their details once more.
Disguise glasses. Grade, B class. Type, technological product.
Ability, completely disguises the user's appearance, spiritual pressure, temperament, voice, scent, and even the essence of their soul.
Introduction.
A Kryptonian creation, acquired after completing Special Mission 5, join the Gotii 13. When I put on these glasses, I am a harmless reporter.
When I take them off, I am a god on Earth. This little tool was going to be invaluable tonight.
Despite being only a B-class item, its effect was powerful, comparable, in some ways, to Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu. Just as he finished reviewing the item's details, a sharp voice interrupted his thoughts.
Emergency call. Emergency call. An urgent situation has occurred.
The spiritual pressures of Captain Kensei Mugyaruma and Vice Captain Mashiro Kuna have suddenly vanished.
All captains are to gather at the 1st Division headquarters immediately. Uehara's smirk widened. It's finally begun. With Kensei and the others out of the picture, the stage was set. Without hesitation, Uehara split off a shadow clone.
Unlike before, when he had dispelled all his clones, this was his first one of the night. It would remain in Soul Society, ensuring he had a solid alibi.
That should be enough to fool even you, Aizen.
The real Uehara, meanwhile, put on his disguise glasses. In an instant, his entire appearance changed. His once youthful face transformed into that of a composed, bespectacled middle-aged man. His spiritual pressure altered, becoming completely unrecognizable.
Satisfied, he activated his Shunkyo space manipulation and slipped into the void.
With this ability, he could freely enter and exit the alternate space, allowing him to traverse Soul Society undetected.
Of course, such movement required spiritual energy.
But with his immense reserves, the cost was negligible. The space around him was barren, save for a small corner filled with various items, several high-end fishing rods, multiple sets of clothing, shoes, and other necessities. Uehara casually picked up a white windbreaker that he had prepared in advance and swapped it with his Shinigami uniform. Then, he retrieved a mirror.
The reflection that stared back at him was completely different from before. A handsome, bespectacled man with sharp black hair and a refined aura. As expected of me.
Even when disguised, I'm still stunning.
If only I were a little taller. He had even planned for that.
The clothes and shoes he wore were stolen, borrowed from a noble's mansion.
No records, no proof.
If someone tried to track him, they'd find nothing.
A battle of deception against Aizen. It's all in the details.
With everything in place, Uehara swiftly moved toward Rukangai. While the other captains were scrambling to gather at headquarters, he was already making his move.
Thanks to Shunkyo's space manipulation, he bypassed every security barrier without effort.
To the guards and patrols, he was nothing more than an invisible ghost. Within moments, he had breached the soul-sealing membrane, the supposedly impenetrable boundary between the Siriitii and Rukangai.
As expected, it was utterly useless against him. Under the moon's watchful gaze, Uehara sharpened his spiritual senses. A moment later, he locked onto two distinct spiritual pressures.
With a small smirk, he moved toward them without hesitation.
Back at the 1st Division headquarters, tension filled the room.
The captains of the Gotii 13 stood assembled, their expressions grim.
Even the usually laid-back Kayaraka Shunsui was no longer smiling.
His usual playfulness had been replaced with razor-sharp focus. In a single night, an entire team had vanished without a trace. Not just any team, but the 9th Division, along with its captain and vice-captain.
This was no ordinary attack. The only one who remained completely unfazed was Yamamoto Genryosai Shigakuni.
The ancient leader stood firm, his wooden cane pressed into the floor as he issued orders with unshakable authority.
3rd Division Captain, Rojuro Odoribashi, rose.
5th Division Captain, Hirako Shinji.
7th Division Captain, Love Ekawa. You three will lead the search and rescue operation. 2nd Division Captain, Shihoin Yoruchi. Remain on standby. 6th Division Captain, Kuchiki Jinrei. 8th Division Captain, Kayaraka Shunsui. 13th Division Captain, Yukitake Jushiro. You will assist me in defending the Siriitii. 4th Division Captain, Unohana Retsu. Prepare for the wounded.
With the orders given, the captains moved. Chapter 7, Ignoring the Clan Heirloom, Uehara Shiroa, the show begins. After the 1st Division mobilized its forces, the emergency rescue team was swiftly assembled. The team consisted of 5 members, Rose Odoribashi, Hirako Shinji, Ekawa Love, Yadamara Lisa, and the deputy chief of the Kido Corps, Hachijin Ashoda. Standing at the entrance of the 1st Division, Uehara Shiroa watched as the 5 figures hurried away, his thoughts swirling. So, it's unfolding exactly as I remember. 3 captains, 1 vice-captain, and a deputy chief from the Kido Corps, each incredibly skilled and formidable. A lineup like this would normally be more than enough to handle an expedition to Hueco Mundo. But unfortunately, you've all run into Aizen, the master of deception and hairspray.
Still, Uehara Shiroa wasn't too concerned about the outcome.
After all, in the original timeline, none of them had died. They were merely forced to undergo holification and later became members of the Visored.
100 years of exile in the human world?
For a Shinigami, that was hardly different from a decade for ordinary humans. It was more of an extended vacation than a true punishment. Just as Uehara was lost in thought, Kayaraka Shunsui emerged, his usual carefree expression replaced by a rare look of solemnity.
Brother Shunsui, what's wrong?
This isn't like you at all, Uehara Shiroa's shadow clone asked, feigning ignorance. The thought of being seen through never even crossed his mind. The shadow clone technique, originally developed by the 2nd Hokage, might have only been classified as a B-rank technique in the Naruto world, but it was undeniably overpowered. Kayaraka Shuinsui's gaze lingered on Uehara Shiroa before he finally voiced the doubt that had been gnawing at him for a while.
What do you think of Aizen?
The question slipped out before he could stop himself.
Realizing his mistake, he shook his head. Forget it. Maybe I'm just overthinking things. Shinji had once expressed suspicions about Aizen. Not long after, a horrific incident occurred in Rukangai. Kayaraka Shunsui couldn't help but connect the dots. Could Vice Captain Aizen really be involved in something? Impossible. How could someone so perfect have any issues?
Uehara Shiroa's shadow clone scratched his head with a puzzled expression.
Is something wrong with Vice Captain Aizen? That doesn't seem likely. His words only made Kayaraka Shunsui think even harder. After a brief silence, he suddenly spoke. Follow me. With that, he disappeared in Ishuinpa, leaving the shadow clone to follow closely behind. A short while later, the two arrived at the 5th Division barracks. Right on cue, Aizen just so happened to be passing by. Wearing rimless glasses and sporting an unassuming hairstyle, the ever-polite vice captain stopped to salute Kayaraka Shunsui. To Kayaraka Shunsui, the Aizen before him was flawless appearance, voice, height, Zampakuto, even his spiritual pressure. Everything checked out. But to Uehara Shiroa's shadow clone, this Aizen was nothing more than a convincing imitation. This was Kyoka Suigetsu's absolute dominance over the 5 senses, affecting even spiritual perception itself. At every Shino Academy opening and graduation ceremony, Aizen would activate his Shurikai in front of everyone, claiming that Kyoka Suigetsu was just a simple water-type Zampakuto. Of course, Uehara Shiroa, who knew the truth of the story, had never fallen for that lie. Instead, he had always used shadow clones for classes and ceremonies, ensuring that he himself never directly witnessed Kyoka Suigetsu's release. Now, he played along, smiling and greeting the counterfeit Aizen with casual respect. Vice Captain Aizen, still working this late? You really are a model of diligence. It was all about the details. The more natural his reactions, the less suspicion he would arouse. After a brief exchange, Kayaraka Shunsui and Uehara Shiroa left the barracks. Kayaraka let out a breath, his expression softening. Looks like Aizen's fine. I was just overthinking it. Anyone would be suspicious after everything that's happened, Uehara Shiroa replied. Deep down, though, he found it baffling how no one else was seeing through Aizen's schemes. These captains had lived for centuries, even millennia, and yet Aizen was manipulating them right under their noses. Were they simply too complacent after so many years of peace? Or was Aizen just that damn good? Meanwhile, in the Technical Development Bureau, Urahara Kisuk put on his latest invention, an invisibility cloak, and vanished into the night, heading toward the scene of the incident. West Rukongai, District 57. Hayori Saragaki was already engaged in a fierce battle. Her childlike frame was riddled with cuts and bruises, and her blonde pigtails, usually bouncing with energy, now drooped from exhaustion. Still, the badge on her left shoulder, the insignia of the 12th Division's vice captain, gleamed under the moonlight. Gritting her teeth, she refused to back down. A massive black shadow loomed over her, emanating a terrifying presence. A suffocating Ryatsu surged outward like a violent storm, filling the air with the stench of blood and carnage. Hayori's pupils shrank. She knew this Ryatsu. It was the ominous, violent presence of a hollow. But what truly unsettled her was how eerily familiar this humanoid hollow seemed. No time to think. Her instincts took over. Bakuto number 37, Suraboshi. A light blue net of Kido materialized, expanding outward to trap the hollow. But before she could breathe a sigh of relief, the hollow effortlessly ripped through the barrier with a single swipe of its claw. With immense speed, it leaped high into the air, its bone-armored fists plummeting toward her with terrifying force. The gust from its descent blasted against her face, while its sheer size blotted out the moonlight, making her small figure look even more fragile in comparison. The weight of its oppressive spiritual pressure locked her in place, leaving no room for escape. For the first time in a long while, Hayori felt completely trapped. Just as she braced for impact, a calm, lazy voice rang out. You're only using Bakuto? Hayori, when did you get so soft? In a flash, a blade intercepted the hollow's attack, stopping it mid-air. A single strike, and the monstrous force of the hollow was pushed back. The captain-level Ryatsu of Shinji erupted, forcing the hollow to retreat. Hot on his heels, Ikawa Love, Rose Odoribashi, and Yadamaro Lisa arrived as well. Trailing behind them, Hachijin Ashoda, not as adept in Shuinpa, was still catching up. Not far away, Uehara Shiroa watched from the shadows, his gaze locked onto the scene. finally, the show begins. He had actually arrived much earlier, long before Shinji and the others. With time to spare, he had even styled his hair Gao Qiqiang style, leading the fashion trend of the era. Now, he simply wondered what kind of reward would he get this time. A Super Saiyan bloodline would be great. Maybe the Rinnegan with 9 Tomo? No? A 6 Infinity Stone Gauntlet at least? I'm not picky. Meanwhile, Hiyori, still shaken, didn't retort as usual. Instead, she muttered, I can't do anything else. Her words startled Shinji and the others. What did she mean, I can't do anything else? Chapter 8, the rescue team was defeated collectively, and Shiroa Uehara watched the show. Shinji and the others barely had time to process their shock before an enormous humanoid hollow lunged toward them. It wasn't until now that they finally got a clear look at the creature. And what they saw stunned them all over again. Despite his now massive frame, despite the white bone armor covering his arms, despite the square bone mask completely concealing his face, they recognized him immediately. Kensei? Rose Oda Riboshi, Ikawa Love, and Yadamaro Lisa exchanged disbelieving glances. The sheer spiritual pressure emanating from the hollowified figure was overwhelming. The mask covering his face was proof that something wasn't right. No way. Is this really Kensei? They didn't want to believe it, but there was no mistaking it. The white captain's Hiyori draped over his shoulders, the black 69 tattoo on his chest and abdomen. This was Kensei Mugiruma. Regardless of whether this is Kensei or not, we have to fight. Shinji gritted his teeth and tightened his grip on his Zampakuto. Almost immediately, the hollowified Kensei erupted with a devastating surge of Ryatsu, signaling the start of the battle. Be careful, Shinji. Kensei isn't acting like himself. Hiyori tried to warn them, but before she could finish, the fight had already begun. From the very first exchange, Shinji understood what Hiyori meant. Kensei, now devoid of reason, could no longer wield his Zampakuto, yet his raw power was devastating. The bone armor covering his body granted him immense durability, making him nearly impervious to attacks. His punches carried destructive force, shaking the very ground beneath them. Faced with his former comrade, Shinji hesitated. No matter how dangerous Kensei had become, he couldn't bring himself to go all out against him. And that hesitation cost him. Realizing the dire situation, Ikawa and Rose rushed forward to assist. Even with the combined strength of 3 captains, they were barely able to hold Kensei back. Then, suddenly, Mashiro appeared. Her sudden arrival caught everyone off guard. But what shocked them even more was her appearance. Like Kensei, her legs were now covered in white bone armor, and her face was concealed beneath a black and white mantis-like mask. The spiritual pressure radiating from her body was wild and chaotic, a level far beyond what a vice captain should possess. The Shinigami froze in shock. What the hell? Mashiro too? Recovering from their disbelief, Lisa swiftly joined the battle, drawing her Zampakuto. Meanwhile, Hiyori, still weakened from her injuries, collapsed onto the ground. Now, it was 4 Shinigami against 2 monstrous former allies. Yet, despite outnumbering their opponents, the Shinigami were being pushed back. Just when it seemed like they would be completely overwhelmed, salvation arrived. Hachijin Ashoda, the deputy chief of the Kido Corps, finally made it to the battlefield. With his expertise in binding Kido, the battle took a turn. After a grueling struggle, the Shinigami combined their efforts to assist Bokujin in casting Bakuto No. 99, Kin and Ban-Kin. A powerful sealing technique that finally managed to restrain Kensei and Mashiro. But the damage had been done. Shinji and the others stood there, battered and bleeding. Their bodies were covered in deep wounds, their exhaustion weighing heavily on them. Yet, amidst their relief, they failed to notice something important. Hiyori Saragaki's condition was rapidly deteriorating. Her breathing became erratic. Her vision blurred. Her consciousness was slipping. Then, a sudden, violent surge of spiritual pressure erupted from her body. A terrifying black and white hollow mask materialized over her face. Her eyes glowed with raw malice. And in that moment, Hiyori was no longer herself. Hiyori? Shinji's eyes widened in horror.
Rose, Ikawa, and Lisa all took a step back, stunned as they watched Hiyori transform before their very eyes.
Then, darkness fell. A suffocating black veil descended upon them, shrouding the entire battlefield.
Their hearing, sight, smell, even their spiritual senses.
All of it vanished in an instant. What's going on? Ikawa gripped his Zampakuto tightly, desperately trying to call out to his comrades.
But no matter how much he shouted, his voice made no sound. There was nothing. No light, no sound, no presence.
Just an endless void of darkness. Then,
a sudden, searing pain pierced his chest. By the time he registered what had happened, he was already falling. When the darkness finally receded, he found himself lying on the ground, blood pooling beneath him.
And he wasn't alone.
Shinji, Rose, and Lisa had all collapsed around him, their bodies wounded and broken.
Shock and despair filled their eyes. They had lost.
From a distance, hidden in the shadows, Uehara Shiroha leisurely opened another bag of homemade potato chips.
The real show's about to begin.
Only Shinji remained conscious, though barely. Summoning every ounce of his remaining strength, he forced himself to look up. And when he saw who their attacker was, his pupils shrank in horror. Standing over them was a man wearing a white mask, his blade dripping with fresh blood. But what truly sent a chill down Hirako Shinji's spine was the uniform the man was wearing.
It was the 9th Division's captain's uniform. A single name escaped Hirako's lips in a whisper of shock and fury. Tozen Kaname. You were the one who attacked Kensei, weren't you? Why? Why did you betray us? A heavy silence hung in the air. Then, a gentle yet chillingly familiar voice echoed from behind him. He didn't betray me.
Hirako froze. His breath hitched as recognition dawned upon him. Slowly, he turned his head. And there, standing right behind him, was the man he had suspected all along. Aizen Sosuke. A sinister smile curled on Aizen's lips as he stepped forward. Behind him, Ikimaru Jin smirked in amusement. Tozen Kaname knelt before Aizen and bowed his head respectfully.
Lord Aizen. In his hiding spot, Uehara Shiroha's eyes lit up with excitement. Finally, the real mastermind enters the stage. It was his time to act. Shinji clenched his fists, rage twisting his face. I knew something was wrong with you, Aizen. He spat through gritted teeth. Aizen, still eerily composed, gazed down at his injured captain. With an unsettling calmness, he spoke. So, when did you first suspect me? Shinji sneered. Since you were in your mother's womb.
Aizen chuckled at the response, not the least bit fazed.
You have always been perceptive, Captain Shinji, he admitted. But, unfortunately, didn't you notice?
His voice dropped into a chilling whisper.
For the past month, it wasn't even me you were watching. Shinji's eyes widened in realization. He had been played. And now, he and his comrades were nothing more than Aizen's test subjects.
Aizen's blade slowly lifted.
You've served your purpose. But now, I have no more use for you. Chapter 9, Wild Otsutsuki Naruto.
Just as Aizen's blade was about to strike the hollowified Shinji, a sudden slash intercepted his attack.
Urahara Kisuke emerged from under an invisibility cloak, his Zampakuto aimed at Aizen's chest.
Reacting swiftly, Aizen dodged with effortless precision, avoiding any real damage. However, the 5th Division emblem fastened to his right arm was severed by the tip of Urahara's blade, clattering to the ground. As the metallic insignia rolled away, another figure stepped forward. Tessai Tsukabashi, the formidable Kido chief. The towering demon priest stood beside Urahara, his spiritual pressure looming over the battlefield like an impenetrable fortress. Both had arrived unnoticed, their presence masked by Urahara's self-developed invisibility cloaks, which not only concealed their forms but also erased their spiritual pressure entirely. Aizen, unfazed, turned to them with an amused smile. Ah, two more interesting guests have arrived, he mused. His eyes flickered across the battlefield, assessing the situation in an instant.
Urahara Kisuke's usual light-heartedness was gone.
His gaze was cold and sharp, his voice like a dagger.
Aizen, you're really conducting holification experiments on fellow captains?
Aizen merely pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, feigning innocence.
Holification?
I'm afraid I don't quite understand what you're accusing me of, Captain Urahara, he said smoothly.
Could it be that you used some strange technological devices from the Development Bureau to transform Shinji and the others? That would be quite an overreach for someone in your position.
His expression was that of a wronged scholar, as if he were the victim here.
Urahara Kisuke's fists tightened around his sword hilt. Aizen.
It was rare for him to lose composure, but the sight of his former colleagues writhing in agony, on the verge of complete hollow transformation, ignited a fury deep within him. Behind Aizen, Jin observed the scene with his usual mischievous smile, his eyes barely slits as he watched the spectacle unfold.
Meanwhile, Tozen had already drawn his Zampakuto, standing ready to strike at Aizen's command.
As if on cue, the agonized screams of the holified Shinigami filled the air. The violent surge of spiritual energy indicated that they were now moments away from losing themselves completely.
Aizen watched with an almost academic curiosity, then spoke softly. Let it happen.
He adjusted his glasses again, his gaze glinting in the moonlight. The so-called captains of the Gotei 13 are merely this fragile.
I am not giving them a curse, but a gift. Urahara Kisuke, surely you understand that, don't you? Urahara's expression darkened.
He wanted nothing more than to cut Aizen down where he stood, but he couldn't abandon Shinji and the others. Clenching his jaw, he focused all his energy on stabilizing the 8 holified Shinigami with every Kido technique he had mastered. Tessai joined him, skillfully weaving high-level spells to suppress their rampaging hollow transformations. Aizen, watching this struggle, made no effort to interfere.
Jin tilted his head, smirking. Impressive.
The great chief of Kido casting a forbidden technique beyond the 90s level without even chanting, terrifying stuff, really. As he spoke, he casually edged away from Urahara and Tessai.
The moment the two Shinigami completed their spells, Urahara turned his glare toward Aizen once more. Aizen. It's your turn now.
Tessai, having just unleashed one of the highest level Kido techniques, shifted his focus onto Aizen as well.
But Aizen merely smiled.
I'm afraid there's no need for me to fight you, he said calmly.
You've already served your purpose. Meanwhile, in the dimensional rift, Uehara Shiroha observed the entire ordeal with keen interest.
Seeing Shinji and the others fully holified, he let out a relieved sigh.
Mission complete.
The system would soon issue his reward, bringing him one step closer to invincibility.
Satisfied, he turned his attention to the battlefield below. A fight was about to break out.
And he was about to make his entrance.
Without hesitation, Uehara activated his teleportation ability, stepping out of the void silently.
Then, instead of lurking in the shadows, he walked right into the open, gazing up at the enormous golden moon overhead. The moonlight tonight is truly breathtaking, he sighed, as if he were merely out for a nighttime stroll. On such a gentle and elegant night, people should be drinking and chatting, not drawing their swords. He shook his head in mock regret.
It seems I've come at the wrong time.
The entire battlefield fell silent. Even Aizen, for the first time, showed a hint of genuine surprise. Not a single person, not Urahara Kisuke, not Tessai, not even Tozen or Jin, had sensed this man's approach. It was as if he had materialized out of thin air.
Who was he? Wouldn't the esteemed guest care to introduce himself? Aizen asked smoothly, regaining his composure. Uehara Shiroha turned to him with an amused expression. My name? Well, I am Otsutsuki Naruto.
The Otsutsuki clan has long been experts in planting trees.
We've been environmentalists for generations. As the last heir of my noble lineage, you may simply refer to me as the prince.
Aizen narrowed his eyes slightly.
Otsutsuki.
That isn't a name I've heard within the Siriitai or Rakangai, he mused, turning toward Tozen Kaname.
Tozen immediately responded, vanishing in an instant. With lightning speed, he reappeared behind Uehara, his blade already piercing straight through his lower abdomen. Uehara stared at the sword protruding from his stomach, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. How is this possible?" he murmured weakly. His spiritual pressure weakened dramatically as he collapsed to his knees. Yet, something felt off. There was no blood. No wound. Tozen frowned under his mask. He had felt his blade connect, but it was as if it had merely passed through thin air. Urahara Kisuk and Tessai exchanged puzzled glances. There was no spiritual pressure fluctuation. This isn't a Kido spell. Could it be Zampakuto related? Tessai murmured. Not just any illusion, Urahara added, his mind racing. Realizing he had been tricked, Tozen's grip tightened on his blade, his pride wounded. Gritting his teeth, he unleashed his Bankai. Bankai and Makurogi. Instantly, total darkness consumed the battlefield. Sight, hearing, smell, spiritual perception all vanished. Only the sense of touch remained. A second later, Uehara Shiroha was gone. From the void, he smirked, watching as Tozen stood in his own darkness, utterly confused. Tozen had activated his Bankai, and yet, he was now the one unable to sense his enemy. For the first time in his life, Tozen Kaname truly felt blind. Chapter 10, The Horse Talisman of the 12 Talisman. In the blink of an eye, Uehara Shiroha vanished, reappearing effortlessly outside the range of Tozen Kaname's Bankai. The darkness that had engulfed the battlefield now seemed meaningless as Tozen had unleashed his ultimate technique, yet his target had simply escaped. Watching from a distance, Aizen's lips curled into an intrigued smile. "You have quite the impressive ability," he remarked. The moment he finished speaking, he disappeared. A second later, Aizen materialized right in front of Uehara Shiroha, his hand raised in a swift, decisive motion. Heido number 90, Koro Hitsuji. A colossal surge of spiritual pressure erupted, distorting the very atmosphere. The overwhelming force of Aizen's incantationless Koro Hitsuji twisted space itself, forming a sealed black coffin around Uehara Shiroha. Within that coffin, high-density spiritual particles swirled violently, tearing through the enclosed space with raw, destructive power. Watching this unfold, Urahara Kisuk clenched his jaw, a flicker of alarm flashing beneath the brim of his hat. Aizen. This man hid too deeply. On the surface, he seemed ordinary, no particular talent that stood out. But in reality, he was a master of everything. A prodigy among prodigies. Tessai Tsukabshi also frowned, his expression grim. A vice-captain, casting Heido number 90 without an incantation, with this much power. Tessai's voice was laced with disbelief. He, as the great Kido chief, could achieve the same feat. But Aizen wasn't a Kido specialist. Yet his power in Kido was beyond exceptional. And this might not even be his full strength. Just how much power is Aizen hiding? As the black coffin began to compress, Aizen let out a small sigh. What an admirable ability, but I have no more time to waste here. His tone was casual, almost indifferent. Tozen. Jin. We're leaving. Without even bothering to glance back at the battlefield, Aizen turned on his heel and walked away. Tozen followed wordlessly. However, Jin hesitated, glancing at the engulfed Uehara Shiroha. Lord Aizen, don't you want to make sure? Jin's smile was sharp, almost predatory. If the opponent is still breathing, I could finish him off for you. Aizen continued walking, his voice drifting back without a second glance. Jin, if the Soul Society were filled with only mediocre, this world would be far too dull. His words carried an undeniable finality. When I ascend the throne above the heavens, there will naturally be those who crawl beneath my feet. Jin let out a low chuckle. Then, without another word, he followed. Their silhouettes melted into the night, vanishing from sight. Yet, Uehara Shiroha did not reappear. He had remained hidden, silent and unseen. The truth was simple. Tonight wasn't about fighting Aizen. It was about understanding the level of power he would one day face. And Uehara Shiroa now knew.
Aizen had seen through his abilities, choosing to withdraw rather than engage in an unnecessary battle. With the crisis over, Tessai wasted no time.
To save the 8 Holified Shinigami, he began to cast the forbidden Kido of time manipulation. And Uehara Shiroa quickly left the scene, eager for his mission reward. Meanwhile, in the 1st Division barracks, Kayaraka Shunsui sat in silence, his expression unusually serious. Beside him, Uehara Shiroa's shadow clone mirrored his worry, pretending to be deeply concerned. Shunsui, noticing the tension on Uehara's face, offered a rare moment of comfort.
"Don't worry, Shiroa," he said gently.
"Lisa will come back." The shadow clone nodded in silence, feigning relief. At that moment,
the real Uehara Shiroa, who had just left the battlefield, received a system notification.
Ding! Special Mission 7 completed. Reward: A-rank item, Horse Talisman.
A silver-white hexagonal disc materialized in the system space, hovering gently.
In its center, a blue horse-head-shaped talisman radiated a faint glow. Uehara Shiroa's eyes lit up in excitement. He immediately extracted the horse talisman from the system. Horse Talisman. Level: A-rank item. Type: Magical Artifact. Ability: Expels all abnormal conditions and restores things to their original state. Description: Originates from the anime Jackie Chan Adventures, part of the 12 talismans wielded by the demon sorcerer Shindu. Acquired upon witnessing the birth of the Visoreds. Has the power to reverse any damage, even if the target was reduced to nothing. Uehara Shiroa's grin widened as he stored the talisman in his personal space. This thing is just like Crazy Diamond from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but better. The horse talisman's ability was almost identical to Jasuke Higashikata's stand. A healing fist that could revert injuries. It also bore similarities to Inoue Oraheim's Soten Kishun, except without any spiritual energy limitations. From this moment forward, Uehara Shiroa had gained true invulnerability. No poisons, no curses, no holification, and no abnormal statuses could affect him. All of Mayuri Karatsuchi's grotesque science? Useless. Even the terrifying scripts of the stern Ritter. As Knott's fear toxin. Yawatch's almighty. Pranita's nerve control. Giselle's zombie ability. None of it would work on him. Even Kenpachi Zaraki, who had once suffered at the hands of the terrifying stern Ritter guards, would have fallen to their unnatural abilities. Even Ichigo Kurosaki, the so-called Soul Society's savior, had nearly died due to poison attacks. But Uehara Shiroa would never have to worry about such weaknesses. With one mission, he had obtained a god-tier safeguard. Now, his steps felt lighter, his mood brighter. As dawn approached, he returned to the 1st Division's barracks, his face calm and unbothered. Silently, he stepped inside. In the very instant that he entered his quarters, Uehara Shiroa reabsorbed his shadow clone, seamlessly swapping places with it. All the memories of the clone poured into his mind. After reviewing them carefully, he nodded in satisfaction. Flawless, as expected of me. Meanwhile, at Central 46. As expected, the elitist fools in the Central 46 made their final ruling. The 8 Holified Shinigami were sentenced to execution. Additionally, the 2 individuals responsible for their transformation, Urahara Kisuke and Tessai Tsukabshi, were sentenced as well. At the last moment, Shihoin Yaruchi intervened, rescuing all 11 of them. Together, they escaped to the human world. The Soul Society's most powerful Shinigamis. 6 captains. 3 vice-captains. The head of the Kido Corps and his deputy. All gone overnight. Half of the Gotei 13's leadership wiped out. A tense unease spread across Siriitii, but the noble families pretended not to notice. As long as Yamamoto Genryosei remained, they would continue their frivolous lives, playing music and sipping tea. Blissfully unaware that their world was already crumbling beneath their feet. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned.
Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well.
See you in the next one.